So it is absolutely no secret by now that the left is divided, and political pundits that pontificate on this issue, well, they tend to bring on Democratic Party strategists and political consultants that make millions of dollars to feed them the worst information ever. And if you really want to find out why it's the case that the left is divided, then wouldn't you bring on ordinary voters and not people who are the most detached from ordinary voters? You'd think, right? But that hasn't been the case up until this point. So besides a few exceptions, like the Bernie Sanders town hall in West Virginia, MSNBC, they've brought on Democratic Party shills, effectively, individuals who are insiders within the DNC or held powerful positions before, and they will just They'll drone on and on and on about how, it's Bernie bros are angry because they lost. They falsely claim that the election was rigged against Bernie Sanders, but they don't actually listen. But if you are genuinely interested in learning why it's the case that the Democratic Party lost not just in 2016, but in 2014 and 2010, and lost 1,000 seats in state legislatures across the country, then you have to bring on ordinary people and talk with them. And MSNBC is finally doing that in a new segment called Dems Divided.
Well, you've seen the polls, and in America's heartland, Hallie, where frustration with Donald Trump is growing, there's no guarantee that's going to turn into Democratic votes. And I think a big part of it is that the same key factor that helped Donald Trump get elected, that feeling by millions of Americans that they're being ignored by the establishment, isn't being addressed in the way Democrats would like to see it addressed. That's what we found when we sat down in Racine, Wisconsin with 5 voters fired up to oppose Donald Trump's policies. Show of hands, how many of you think the Democratic establishment is doing a good job right now? One tentative hand. How many of you think the Democrats could blow a real opportunity in 2018?
I do. Absolutely.
All 5 of you. So what's going on that makes you feel that way?
I think that there's a lack of understanding of what the message is, if there is one.
I think holistically, the Democrats need to listen more than they speak.
Just ignoring the fact that people need a reason to come out to vote.
It is not enough to say, well, these guys are marching with tiki torches and the president won't say anything about it. You have to come vote for us. That's not enough. They don't feel like they have to work for anyone's vote.
Are you worried the party is becoming the anti-Trump party?
It's easy to get caught up in the anger and say, like, Trump voters are this and Trump voters are that, but that's my family too, those are my people that I grew up with.
I feel like instead of having a plan, putting out fires. Instead of fighting for something, we're resisting. And this resistance has to turn into governance so that we have something to vote for instead of something to vote against.
Every day there's an attack on just basic human rights and dignity that should we not respond, right? We have to. But we also need to respond with, this is what we need to do instead. This is where we should be going.
Democrats are good on social issues, but what are they doing economically to help people?
Economics come first.
But,
roof over my head, food on the table.
But the Democrats are the ones fighting for raising the minimum wage.
But that's the problem. Trump was like saying, okay, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to bring back jobs. No Democrat was saying that.
It is constant fear. And the party that's tapping into that and realizes that and speaks to that isn't winning because all these people are evil or racist or ignorant. They are speaking to their base fears. Give me a way out of that. You'll take the healthcare burden off of me? That's a little less fear. You give me a living wage? That's a little less fear. That's not just a policy to make us popular because everyone wants to make $15 an hour. It's because you're starving if you're not.
So this group and a lot of other Democratic voters I've talked to over the course of the last month or so, they're, yes, concerned about inter-party divide, but also ultimately will that keep them from capitalizing on what is clearly a battle within the Republican Party? They've got record or near record low approval ratings for the president and the GOP-controlled Congress, so they see opportunity, but they say clearly to me, Hallie, what's the message?
So I think that discussion was incredibly important because MSNBC is the one channel that really has the ear of the Democratic Party establishment. So if someone from within the party is likely to hear anything, it's going to come from MSNBC. So this is important, and I think that the insight from these average voters was really important here. So one of them said that the Democratic Party, they're ignoring the fact that people need a reason to come out and vote. Yes, I've said this probably 1,000 times on this podcast. You can't just expect your core base to come out and vote against someone who is evil or crazy. You actually have to give them a reason to vote for you. You have to offer them something that will benefit their lives. Because that's the way voting works. Voting is a chore. You have to leave your house, you have to register, you have to stand in line sometimes for hours. In some states, if you're a person of color, you have to put up with these arbitrary voter ID laws that are designed to actually disenfranchise you. Voting is a chore. So if you really want voters to put in that effort, you have got to make the effort yourself to reach out to these voters. And I'm glad they made this point here. Now, one panelist alluded to the fact that attacking Trump isn't enough. Yeah, that is an extension of the idea that you have to offer policies to voters in order to get them to vote for you. But certainly, if you're the opposition party, you can't just attack the party in power. You still have to offer an alternate view of the way you think society should be in America, of how you can make society more equitable, what you can do for the average American. They also said here that they don't feel as though, that the party doesn't feel as though they have to work for anyone's vote. This is the hubris we saw with Hillary Clinton. That's exactly correct. Hillary Clinton just assumed that her core base would come out and vote for her no matter what, even after she rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders, spit in their faces, selected a running mate who was to her right when people were afraid that she was too right-wing to be the Democratic Party's leader. But she just expected that they would vote for her no matter what. And what did she do? She went on to court Republicans, moderate Republicans. So this is something that you just cannot expect. You never, ever, ever should be cocky enough to assume that you are going to have your base no matter what. Because if you've been losing, that's an indication that you are not appeasing your base. Now, one guy said here, economics come first, roof over my head, food on the table. So basically, the implication here is that the Democratic Party needs to prioritize economics over identity politics. Now, I would actually say that you don't have to just prioritize economics. You can have both. You can actually look out for people of color and disadvantaged minorities. You can have that while simultaneously catering to economic interests as well. That's really important. But the Democratic Party, they don't realize that they can have it both ways, and they're being purposefully obtuse here because if they really did fight for us economically, then that means they would have to betray their largest corporate donors. And these multinational corporations that bankroll the Democratic Party and the DNC and campaigns of Democrats across the country, they don't want the Democratic Party to come out in favor of a single-payer system. They don't want the Democratic Party to endorse tuition-free public colleges and universities. They don't want the Democratic Party to abolish private prisons, because if the Democratic Party adopted policies that would existentially threaten their largest financial donors, then obviously those donations would go away like that. So that's why they don't do it. So, I think that there's going to be some pushback from that comment, what that guy said, economics first, and I think that makes sense. Economics first, yes, roof over my head and food on the table, those are the most important. But the Democratic Party, the only reason why they specifically cater to identity politics and overuse identity politics to the detriment of economic issues when they don't have to, is because this is the only area where they can actually be progressive. It's cheap. It's lazy. Society has changed. Culture has evolved in this country. We're all more socially liberal in this country. Even young Republicans, they support the legalization of marijuana. They support gay marriage. So it's really easy to come out in favor of social justice, but it's difficult if you're bought off to come out in favor of economic issues. So getting back to this panel here, the overall utility in this panel is so fundamentally important. I cannot stress this enough. So whoever greenlit this segment, Dems Divided, kudos to that person, because this is what MSNBC should have done the day after Hillary Clinton lost. The day after. Because you cannot continue to question why it's the case that the Democratic Party and the left in general is so divided if you're not going to talk to normal people. I hate to break it to you, but these political consultants and Democratic Party strategists in Washington, D.C., they're in the same bubble as the Democratic Party's elites and leaders. And these are the same people who led the party to ruin. Because if you're a Democratic Party strategist, if you were a strategist prior to 2016 and you're still a strategist in 2017, you should have been fired, because after losing to Donald Trump, which is a cakewalk, you should have been fired. You're not a strategist because you're not strategic, and whatever strategy you have certainly isn't conducive to electoral success. So this is a really great idea, and I hope that MSNBC actually continues with this segment, because this is something that is necessary. The party has got to be introspective if they ever want to win another election again.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.